Hello, my name is Brianna Dunkel, and today we will be discussing an issue in the criminal justice system. We will specifically be looking at the lack of communication accessibility for deaf people when it comes to obtaining an attorney. First, we're going to look at the history because there is a perpetuated stigma when it comes to deaf people and their use of ASL. It's a cultural thing, it's embedded. And so American Sign Language, also known as ASL, was founded in France. This gentleman on the left picture, his name is Laurent Clerc. He was one teacher who was teaching sign language, French Sign Language in France. Then this gentleman on the right, Thomas H. Gallaudet, went over to France to learn about sign language and bring it back to the States. And Thomas Gallaudet established the first School of the Deaf in 1817 in Hartford, Connecticut. This was during a time where education for deaf children, there was two forms, oral and sign language. However, sign language was seen as crude gestures, and they did not want deaf children using sign language because they thought that it would make them too different instead of mainstreaming their education by using oral education. This led to the Milan Conference of 1880, where it was decided that oral therapy was voted best education for deaf children by educators. American Sign Language was outlawed, meaning no one could use it, and students would be punished if they were caught using sign language. And this established the opinions that we still have today about sign language and deaf people. And so we see the perpetuated opinions in the issues and cases that we will be reviewing today, especially under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. It requires attorneys to provide equal access to their services. However, this is not the case most of the time, as attorneys often argue that there is a disproportionate burden, meaning that maybe due to a lack of funding, they are unable to provide services, or they do not know that they are supposed to provide these services. And when they do provide the services, they often provide unqualified interpreters or services that are not up to par. And sometimes we even have attorneys where there's just an unwillingness to accommodate, and they just won't meet the needs of their deaf client. And oftentimes we see that ASL is just not a desired language. Oftentimes people feel a sense of fear when they are faced with something that they have never seen before or have no knowledge about. So the statistics that I have here on the left, in 2016, out of the 1.3 million attorneys that are in the United States, only 250 of them are deaf. Meaning out of the 1.3 million, only 250 of them are really capable of communicating freely and providing those services to deaf clientele. So the first case that we will be looking over happened in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where a deaf woman was suing a hospital because they did not provide sign language interpreters for her young son who was hospitalized. And ironically, the attorney ended up not providing interpreters to ensure effective communication. And he suggested that the deaf client's son, who was hospitalized, be her interpreter. And that was just inappropriate and is not allowed under the ADA. And so she refused, and the lawyer ended up withdrawing their representation, and that led to the lawsuit being dismissed. The second case we're going to look at is Rochester, New York, where a deaf woman retained a divorce attorney. And after asking multiple times for a sign language interpreter, the lawyer refused. And after several meetings of her not understanding and their communication being blocked, and even the attorney requesting that the client's sister act as an interpreter, the complexity of the case just made it to where she didn't understand what was going on, and she ended up facing big losses in the divorce. And so there seems to be this continual issue where there's a lack of accommodation, and it's put on the deaf person to figure out how to communicate with hearing people rather than hearing people trying to meet halfway to communicate with deaf people. And so when we look at solutions, first we need to identify that there is a perpetuated discrimination and negative opinions that are in the perspective of hearing people towards deaf people. And so in order to fix that, we need to take accountability and be open and receptive to meeting deaf clients halfway. And to do this, first and foremost, we should provide qualified legal sign language interpreters. Communication is key, especially between client and attorneys in complex cases. And also, in tandem with this is to provide necessary technical support. There's lots of different technologies that deaf people use to communicate with hearing people, and it's very accessible and easy to use. And so, in order to get this technical support, attorneys can utilize funds available at local bar associations or private organizations. There are funds available. They just have to look for it or be open to looking for it. And lastly, and my biggest point, is to expand secondary language requirements to include sign language. Here in Texas, having Spanish as a secondary language is pretty common for any occupation, especially in the service industry. And since being an attorney is a service position, then sign language should also be considered a secondary language requirement, because you should, not shut out a whole group or a population of people because, you're not comfortable using their language. And this isn't just a court issue. This is also a criminal justice issue. So this video here is from September 13, 2022, so last year. And it's showing the arrest of a deaf 71-year-old woman named Karen McGee. Long story short is that she missed her flight, and in an attempt to board a new one, the police were called, and communication or successful communication was not had. And while she thought she was being helped to board a new plane, she was arrested. And her arm was broken by a jailer, and she was left untreated for 3 days, and afterwards she was released. And so I'm going to play this video really quickly, and this will show what happened.
The incident happened on September 13th last year at the Austin airport when Karen McGee was waiting for her connecting flight to Seattle. She waited at the gate, but later learned the gate changed and her flight left, but she couldn't hear when they paged her.
She controls her hearing aids through an app on her phone, but at the time the event took place, she didn't know that her hearing aids were actually on a preset setting that didn't fully cover the sounds that she was missing.
McGee was issued a new ticket on Alaska Airlines. She learned her cousin was on the earlier flight that was delayed, so she asked to get on that one.
It was like a complete coincidence that she was rebooked on Alaska by Delta, and that her cousin was literally sitting at that gate on a plane.
McGee's attorneys say she was trying to communicate with the gate agents, but they were being dismissive. The agents called security, and McGee grew frustrated, confused, so she sat down. That's when Austin police show up for a disturbance call. Officers tried to de-escalate the situation and explained she could either rebook the flight or be arrested for criminal trespass.
I noticed that you have some hearing aids. Okay, just want to make sure. Are you hard of hearing?
An Austin airport employee then reads the criminal trespass charge, but her attorneys say she didn't know she was given a notice of arrest.
In this case, the need was for someone to get down and speak slowly and not kind of like huddle around her and intimidate her.
McGee was wheeled out of the airport in a wheelchair and booked into the Travis County Jail, where attorneys say McGee was shoved against a wall by an officer, her handcuffs twisted with extreme force, causing her to break her arm. She was booked for 3 days and only given an Aleve and Advil for the pain. In a statement, Travis County Sheriff Sally Hernandez says, "Our agency takes the health and safety of the individuals in our facilities very seriously and takes appropriate steps to maintain their safety."
They knew she was hearing impaired. They documented in the records.
There you go. Put your feet up there. Put your feet up. All right, get backwards.
The incident happened.
And so these incidents, they do not happen little, they actually happen quite often. And so, what we can do is we can be more open to the possibilities of being part of a proactive solution rather than trying to catch up, and be more compassionate and willing to understand these people's situations. And so these are resources, and I've also listed here down below. Signingasl.org is a great resource for learning just a few signs. If you know the basic signs, you can communicate with a deaf person, and it's a lot easier in those circumstances to control situations and not let it get out of hand, as what it seems like what happened at the Austin airport. And so thank you.